Hello, Abramada readers. My name is Ratnaguna, and I'm delighted today, absolutely delighted, to have Sravaniya with me in the studio. Hello, Sravaniya.
Hello, Ratnaguna. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great. Well, when I say I've got you here with me, that means I've got you about maybe 2,000 miles away. You're in America, aren't you?
That's correct. In Boston, essentially,
Boston.
on the East Coast. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes. So let me say a few words about Sravaniya to begin with. Obviously, you can tell by his name, he's a member of the, let me just adjust this. He's a member of the Triratna Buddhist Order, has been for about 18 years. But he's also a musician, a classical musician, and his professional name is Mark Latham. Let me just tell you a few things about him. I hope this is up to date. If not, you can correct me afterwards. You are currently the music director and conductor of the New Hampshire Philharmonic Orchestra. You're the director of the orchestra and adjunct professor of conducting, violin and viola at the University of Massachusetts, Lowell. Is that still correct?
That's still correct.
Yep. And you're a violinist in the Aria Loca string quartet.
Correct.
I think you're a few other things as well, actually. You're a teacher.
I am a teacher as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I've been looking you up a little bit, and it looks like you love teaching music to people.
I do. I do enjoy teaching. I've always, even from about the age of 20, I've somehow always taught. And that when I became more involved with Buddhism, that somehow, perhaps not surprisingly, transformed itself into trying to communicate and teach Dharma and meditation and that kind of thing as well. So
Yes.
somehow I just like to communicate, actually.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Good. So now I've got some questions for you here. So you're a classical musician. You
Correct.
obviously love classical music. It's your life. It's what you've dedicated your life to. So here are a couple of maybe rather challenging questions for you. Why should people listen to classical music?
Well, it's a great question. It is a challenging question, particularly today when a lot of people, particularly in the West, um, are seemingly more drawn to other kinds of music, particularly pop music, rap, hip hop, whatever it might be. Classical music seems to have taken, the back burner, as they say. Um, so why should I promote, as it were, an interest, even a love in classical music, in either playing or listening? There are, well, I think there are some good reasons that we should endeavor to take on that proposal, as it were, to expand the fields of classical music to a wider audience. Perhaps the main one is that I think classical music, by which I'm talking mainly about Western music, that is largely, if it's sort of pre-19th century, we're talking mostly European music. But today that's obviously expanded to, to include, well, anyone who's writing the certain idiom that includes certain forms, certain combinations of instruments. But I think one of the primary reasons that people might want to listen to classical music is that word itself, listen. Classical music, I believe, more than most other music I know of, I can't say I'm an expert in world music, that is, like, Indian raga and so on. But in classical music invites us to listen with attention. A lot of classical music is much longer in its offering, in its scope, than most, let's say, pop songs, for example. Most pop songs, they probably, there's a historical reason that they were probably derived to fit onto a one of those little records whose names I've forgotten. That
45.
the 45, like you'd get in the jukebox. So there was a sort of time constraint, and so many pop songs fit into that mold. There are a few exceptions, like for instance Bohemian Rhapsody, which is quite long compared to most pop songs. But classical music, as we know, a Wagner opera is 5 hours long. A Beethoven symphony is 30, 40. If it's the ninth, it's 65 minutes long, and so forth. So even a single movement of, let's say, a Schumann sonata or Schubert piano sonata can be 10 minutes. It's just, twice as long, let's say, as the average pop song. So it's inviting us to pay attention in a certain way and to, in a way, take that listening seriously. So I think classical music, more than a lot of other music, resists the temptation to have music be sort of background noise, background entertainment. There was a composer, Eric Satie, a French composer in the early 20th century, who wrote. He was a sort of, in a way, an avant-garde composer who wrote very simple music, which was seen as avant-garde because the trend that we're talking, let's say 1917, was to write very complex music, rhythmically, harmonically, and so forth. But Satie went against this grain and wrote, his famous piano pieces, like the Gymnopédie, and he wrote what he called armchair music, with the idea that in the interval of let's say, a play or a concert, there would just be this background music. And when he saw that people were listening to it, he sort of rush up and down the aisle and say, no, you're not supposed to be listening. It's just supposed to be entertainment. So there seemed, at least at that time, to be a wanting to enter the music more deeply. But now, particularly with the advent of technology, of radio, of CDs and so forth, of electronic music, it's very easy to turn on music and have it be, as we know, background music. You might be cooking in the kitchen, you're listening vaguely to music in the background. But classical music, as I said, is an invitation to listen more carefully, more deeply, more seriously. And why is that? I think that is because it uses forms and structures that invite us to question, to see, to investigate meaning in our lives. I would say that you might say that's quite a dramatic claim, but I think there's truth in it. I'm not sure I can prove it, quote unquote, scientifically, but I believe that a music that can present these challenges, these questions. So I listen to a piece, and now we're going beyond the realm of purely classical music. And if the piece does something in some way to transform my experience, to have me ask, maybe even unconsciously, questions about the meaning of my life, about the progress of my life, about the meaning of community, of friendship, and so forth, then I think that, well, that's a music that's worth taking seriously. I think there are definitely, of course, other musics that do that, but quite a lot of music that we hear, I believe, today is in the sort of entertainment category. Of course, a lot of probably pop singers might resent that statement, but I think that is, for me, one of the attractions, let's say, of a 30-minute symphony, is that you're entering a space, an auditory space, that over the course of those 30 minutes can take you to quite a deep and profoundly, in a way, spiritual place that, as I said, can begin to pose the questions that might transform my life.
Very interesting. You talked about meaning, and a few weeks ago I interviewed Advaya Chitta, who is a clinical psychologist who's very, very interested in music. and we talked for a while about meaning in music. Can music convey meaning? And as I said in that interview, that it's exercised me for a long time. I listen to music, then I think, what I'm actually doing here. You know, am I learning anything? It's something's happening. There's some kind of transformation happening, but is there meaning to that transformation? I wonder, do you have anything to say to that?
Yeah, so I did listen to your interview with Advayachita, and it's a really, really good interview. Um, well, I think we might first of all question what is meaning in the first place. And you mentioned the word transformation. So if meaning is somehow bound up with a process of transforming something, in, let's say in our minds, well then certainly music can have meaning. Particularly in, you know, and you talked about in that interview, well, music with words is one thing, because words, as we know, of course, invoke the conceptual, but not, you know, music without lyrics, let's say, just, you know, sort of quote unquote abstract music. Well, it still, as we know, elicits responses from us. You know, Advayachita talks about, you know, the emotional responses, and I know he mentioned a proposal, or maybe music evolved as a sort of you know, genetic determinant that favored the evolution of Homo sapiens. I don't know if that's true or not, but you know, we are certain, because it happens to everyone, that music, when we listen to it, arouses an emotional response of some kind. You know, I've done sort of experiments where I'd play to a group of people. I'd play, let's say, a funeral march by, doesn't matter, by Beethoven, let's say. Yeah, that could be solo piano, could be. I tried to find something that was unlikely people would know. So an obscure, let's say, a quite obscure funeral march, and then I'd ask the listeners to write down a few sort of adjectives that describe their emotional response to this. And what was interesting, quite often you get, you know, words that were similar in tone. But then once in a while you get something that, you play a funeral march, so kind of slow, kind of probably in the minor mode and that kind of thing. But somebody would say, "Oh, I'm walking through a beautiful, you know, valley of sunflowers in a mountain range." You know, I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Okay." So it's not universal, the response, but nevertheless, it did arouse a response.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think meaning comes from, in a way, how we ingest that response, what we do with it. So if music, you know, I remember, for instance, well, I know you talked about listening to the chaconne at a retreat, and you know, so I was 15. You know, I'd already been playing violin for a number of years, and I'd learned the first movement of that same, in fact, that same partita that houses the chaconne, which is the last movement. And the first movement is an Allemande, a slow dance in D minor. And my parents were going through a divorce. It was quite messy. I was at boarding school, but you know, it was just a mess. And you know, what does a 15-year-old do with those emotions? So what I would do, I'd quite consciously, you know, I'd sort of get in a certain mood. And at the time, I'm not sure that it was specifically related to, you know, what was going on with my parents. But anyway, I'd get in and I realized I needed, as it were, therapy. So I just go and play. I could find a room and play the Allemande from the second partita, the solo violin by Bach, and there's no question in my mind it had a salutary effect on my emotional state. So you know, that seems to me to have meaning, that I could use music as a vehicle to transform myself from, you might say, well, a negative state of mind to something much more positive, more that I could then sort of proceed with my life as a 15-year-old, trying to figure out his life. You know, the arena of music and meaning well, it is very interesting, because it seems to be the case, but it's a little hard to pinpoint what's really going on. I think also, you know, a piece that's, let's say, a movement, let's say that's 12 minutes long, that's quite a big, it's a big piece. And it can only hold together if it has a certain structure, a certain form. It's just the same as architecture. And I believe that it's the structures that are particularly well developed in classical music that invite us into a space, just like you went, let's say you go to Versailles. It does, I believe, something to our sort of mental and emotional capacities that provide us a means to better negotiate our own messy worlds, our own messy minds. I think, I think the structure of music, and particularly of classical music, where these structures are very well developed, become both a vehicle and a metaphor for what we're trying to do in terms of organizing our lives in a way, from a Buddhist perspective, so we suffer less, and so we cause less suffering for other people. If I lead a totally messy life, messy ethically, messy in my how I communicate, in my activities, then my project to cause less suffering is going to be much less available to me, much less successful. And I think music is a vehicle that is well structured music to kind of ride or to enter a space of organization that at the same time leaves room for interpretation and improvisation even.
You're reminding me of a book that I read a few years ago called Unapologetic. It's by a Christian who was fed up with all these contemporary atheists having a go at Christianity. So he wrote this book in response. And there's one part of it when he was married, and he was talking about the fact that he and his wife had one of those awful rows, terrible rows, tearing each other to pieces. And he left the house and he went to a cafe, and he was in a terrible state. And for some reason, they were playing Mozart in the cafe, which, what kind of cafe plays Mozart? I don't know where he lives. But anyway, they were playing something by Mozart. And he said he could feel it healing him and putting everything in perspective. It's a very, very moving passage of the book, actually.
Beautiful, yeah. And we know music does that. It's particularly, as we said, abstract music. Then there was music that does not have words attached to it. Seems to be a very direct channel into our emotional makeup. And I don't know if you've read the work of Oliver Sacks, but I believe it's his last book was called Musicophilia, in which Oliver Sacks, who was a neurologist, describes various examples in which music both helped, but also was one of the last faculties of sort of deteriorating brains to go. And for instance, he talked about I can't remember his name, but he was an English, quite a well-known English choir director who suffered a stroke, and as a result of this very bad stroke, his memory duration was left at something like 9 seconds. And I saw a picture of this sort of journal like it. So I can see freedom coming. I can see I'm going to get better, but then and it was thrust out. And probably 10 seconds later, he'd write the same thing. I can see a light at the end of the tunnel, and it was very sad. About 6 months after he survived his terrible stroke, but some friends and colleagues of his went to visit him, and these were singers, and they said, "Oh, we'll sing for him, something that he knows." And so they started, this small, I don't know, maybe it was 10 people from the choir, and he began to sing, and then he seemed to start conducting them, and as long as the music was going, he could do that. He knew some part of his brain went beyond the sort of 9 second limit of his memory. In other words, the music went, it had the capacity somehow. It was like the last thread in his brain that was connected to memory in a sense. And it seems that music in the brain connects, both the older parts of the brain, the newer parts of the brain, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, all these parts are somehow participating in the activities in our neuronal circuits, you might say. So there's something very profound about hearing and listening, and also if you're a player of playing music as well. There seems to be, in other words, a profound biological something that's going on when we listen to and play music. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Let me move on to another question here. You've already mentioned that classical music seems to be on the back burner, as you put it. Is it dead now? Do you think is at the end of the road in the 21st century? Is that something that we used to do, and in the end we're not going to really do it anymore? Do you think?
Well, I hope not. I don't think it will. I don't think it's like saying, okay, well, not that many people go to the National Gallery or the Louvre or whatever to look at paintings, but I don't think the power that, a Raphael or a work by Van Gogh or Monet is going to ever vanish. So even though, Western classical music might might be on the back burner in terms of, the proportion of people, let's say in London or New York or Boston, listen to it. My belief, which is quite strong, is that it has so much to offer the listener that, it'll never die out. So my project, is to try to introduce as many people as possible, particularly younger people, say, well, actually, check out this, even a Bartok string quartet. It's wild stuff, some of it. It's really exciting. I was in a quartet in Canada, and we did quite a large number of school concerts. And one year we undertook the project of learning a piece called Black Angels by the American composer George Crumb. And it's a large piece. It's got 13 movements because he is also based around certain numbers, particularly numbers 7 and 13. So it's a 13 movement piece involving all sorts of altered techniques and this kind of thing, and shouting and chanting numbers in various languages. And we played, and we thought, and it's actually, the quartet is mic'd, and there is a gong, and there's cymbals that you're sort of clattering on the strings, but it's a really strong piece, and it invokes music from the past, like Schubert and so forth. And we played it at various children's concerts. It was an incredible hit, and so because it had something to say, he wrote it in a way as a statement lamenting the war in Vietnam in 1973. That's irrelevant to a 7-year-old living in Canada or a 10-year-old, right? But somehow the music, it was strong enough and well structured enough. It's a very well structured piece that it communicated something important, something both delightful, scary, inviting, challenging to these children, right? So I think the project, as I said, is to invite people. Well, okay, well, I know it's like, okay, you don't really have to get dressed up if you go to Symphony Hall, but let's see what this Bruckner Symphony is all about, even though it's like 70 minutes long. And I think, like a lot of great art, to some degree, it transcends culture. It's helpful if you know a little bit about it, but you don't have to. But I think the point is it's offering us something that's larger than ourselves. So I think the difficulty is to, it's well, it's related to all sorts of things, but it's quite largely related to education and allowing people who don't know much or don't know anything even about this music to see, oh, this is amazing, wow, Beethoven Symphony, it's incredible. Of course, one of the most famous melodies, possibly the most famous melody in existence, is the the so-called joy theme from the Ninth Symphony. And I've conducted it twice. It's an incredible adventure to conduct that symphony, of course. Uh, but I ask, well, why is it such a good melody? Why is it so well known? And it's partly because it's that sort of self-fulfilling loop in a way that it's well known because it's well known. But at the same time, there's something profoundly simple, profoundly moving, well structured, memorable, that again invites us to ask, well, what is that that's so attractive, that's so profound about this incredibly simple tune? And Beethoven, it didn't come easily. He worked on this melody that was supposed to represent a sort of invitation to universal brotherhood in a way. It took him like 15 years. You can see in his notebooks dating back that, for Beethoven, it was not an easy task to find such a profoundly simple but yet beautiful tune. So, yeah, the challenge is to just sort of get the average person on the street. Well, no, don't go over there. Come into this hall and listen to this Mozart string quartet, whatever it might be. And they'll say, "Wow, I had no idea." So I think in large part, there's the education. There's also the aspect that I read a very interesting essay. This is quite a while ago by Charles Rosen, who's an American musicologist, who proposed that until the advent of radio, most people played something. Even most working class homes, both in Europe and in America, had even if it was a battered upright piano of some sort, and they would gather around the piano, play, sing, and this was common entertainment. And you look at a lot of the composers, they would write. Beethoven's a classic example. He'd write all sorts of like arrangements of Scottish folk songs, for example, right, as a way to make money. But people would then sit around somewhere, probably in Edinburgh, who knows where, around an old battered piano, out of tune. But that's what they would do for entertainment, because of course there's no television or radio in Beethoven's day. And because there was that sort of, Charles Rosen says, that physical connection, well, then when you went to hear a concert, it was in a way more accessible, more meaningful, because it's something you yourself participated in. I think there's some truth in that. So in a way, then from that, well, how can we get again more people playing music rather than listening? I think that's quite important. In a way, that's why pop music, you've got sort of so-called garage bands and so forth. In a way, those have to some extent taken over the function that the old battered piano took. Music as something just to be listened to is quite a recent development. It's not something that was always happening. In the even in sort of not exactly working, but let's say peasant society, there was singing and dancing and playing, and people participated. So the idea that, particularly, and this is something I resist as a conductor, that everyone should be in a hall, well dressed, very quiet, still. That's actually, to me, not helpful to the listening process. Music, as we know, it's something embodied. We experience it in our bodies. So to not move in some way when we listen to, doesn't matter if it's the Rite of Spring or the Moonlight Sonata, which I know Advaita loves. so not somehow move with it. It is, I think that's a bit antithetical to the nature of music. So I sort of invite, they don't do it, but I invite audiences, if there's a what get it, go into the aisles and start dancing, please, because that's what it's about, really. So, I'm not a stickler for, oh, it has to be dead quiet. Of course, if a telephone goes off, that's another matter. But so there is this, this aspect that this embodied nature of music is very strong, of course, connected with dance, connected, probably from way back when with somehow with percussion and so forth. Yeah, so but to go back to your question, we have to persuade at the local level the encouragement for as many children as possible to participate in the musical adventure.
Yeah, yeah. I want to move on to the fact that you are a conductor and you're also a violinist, and a very, very good violinist, I must say. 2 years ago, I heard you perform some solo violin pieces, and one of them was when I say solo, I mean the violin was a solo, but you had a piano backing, I think it was, accompaniment, as far as I remember. But you played the Lark Ascending, and it was absolutely marvelous, beautiful. And I wonder what prompted you to move from being a violinist and violist, perhaps as well, to conducting. Why would you do that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, in a way, it just happened by chance. I was in a professional string quartet in Canada, as I mentioned, and where I was living, there was a strong Suzuki program. To cut a long story short, they had sort of internal struggles. They had a string orchestra. And anyway, as a result of these internal, they invited me. I was not in that program as a sort of neutral person, to take over their string orchestra. I said, well, that sounds like fun, And because it was a very strong program, the orchestra, it consists of about 17 or 18 kids, anywhere from about 11 to 17 years old, but able to play Tchaikovsky's Serenade for Strings. So in other words, a very good level group. And that was, I didn't have the faintest idea about score study, how to conduct, so I just did my best. And then when I moved to this area, New England, another chance happenstance, a friend of a friend who was a conductor herself she was leaving. She conducted a community orchestra, and my friend said, oh, you should just apply for this. So I sent in this rusty VHS tape of myself conducting actually in a mall in Canada, this group of kids, and they invited me to the finals, and I conducted. Anyway, the next thing I knew, I was music director of a community orchestra, and that's sort of where it started. And then as a violinist, I was playing in it doesn't exist anymore, but it was the New Hampshire Symphony, not the one I conducted, but the New Hampshire Symphony, and the conductor, well, the more recent conductor himself was a professor of conducting at the University of Michigan, and inevitably we started talking about conducting, and I asked him some questions, having never had any training myself. I said, oh, yeah, I do the summer camp. You should come. It's very intense, 18 days in the middle of nowhere in Maine, and initially there's a string quintet playing the string parts and a piano playing the wind and brass parts. And then at the end of that, he just said, he said quite sort of simply, well, you're quite good. You should take this more seriously. And that's all he said. Cut a long story short, next thing I was at the University of Michigan studying with him full time and getting a doctorate in orchestral conducting. And that was great because, I realized that a lot of the time I'd been sort of winging it, trying to figure out in difficult, like I remember conducting Sibelius violin concerto, and it's just something that's quite hard to conduct, just to work out how you're going to communicate with the soloist and the orchestra. And most of my solutions were quite good, but I think without the training, it was much more challenging than it might have had to be. Anyway, so. And in a way, it was a fantastic experience to go back. So I was already in my 40s, to go back of course, my colleagues were all half my age, which was in itself quite interesting. But just to go back and spend some years studying both the physical aspects of conducting, music history, musicology. It was really a wonderful experience just to sort of forget about my workaday life, go back to full-time study of music. It was an amazing experience. Anyway, so as a result, yeah, I'm a much better conductor, much more able to, yeah, just communicate what needs to be communicated in a piece. Um, I remember I was driving somewhere, and somebody sort of innocently asked me in the car. We were going, I forget where we were going anyway. What is it about conducting you like? And I said, I think that's a great question. I said, well, partly I enjoy it because it's an impossible task. Because a conductor needs to be quite adept at many things, and I enjoy that challenge. You have to be, obviously you have to know the music very well. You have to somehow be able to negotiate, the as we talked about earlier, the form, the structure of a piece, the harmonies. You have to know, how can I communicate what seems to be my emotional response to this music, to this particular section, even to a particular chord. Um, you have to be able to. You have to be a good communicator with the orchestra. Um, you have to be a good communicator with the board of the orchestra. You have to be a good communicator with the audiences. You have to know about the style of music, about the history, the biography in a way of the composer, this kind of thing. So it's incredibly multifaceted, and I really enjoy that dive. And you have to be a good psychologist. You've got, let's say, a player, particularly a wind player, let's say an oboist, who's a very good player, but they got their own ego. So I have to know, well, how can I want it to sound a certain way, okay, have to fit in, but they want to do their own thing. How can I communicate in a way that's not going to sort of bruise their own ideas, their own ego? Um, yeah, so and I think I'll just go from here to say, I've long seen, one of the reasons I enjoy working with orchestras is because I see the orchestra as a metaphor, a living metaphor for you might call it the ideal community. So what do I mean by that? And we can relate it to the Buddhist concept of Sangha in a way, in its ideal form. So an orchestra is a group of, let's say, 50, 80 people. If it's professional, because they're all extremely good players, they've been working for many years at their individual instrument. So they've all got their own ideas, they've all got their own egos. But what are they doing? They're playing, let's say, a Brahms symphony. The players are putting their expertise as a community to the service of something that they know in a way is greater than themselves. So an ideal community is doing the same thing. Let's say in Buddhist terms, the project is awakening, right? In an ideal Sangha, we're all trying to help each other with that same project. Yeah, we all have our own ideas. We might have ideas about how to meditate, how to study, how to communicate, and so forth. Nevertheless, we're trying to do these things in a way that's at the service of the greater project, which is awakening in Buddhist terms. And it's really the same in an orchestra. And furthermore, you're trying to communicate the ideals of that project to a wider audience. So for me, it's really a beautiful undertaking to work with that in a way, that ideal. And the conductor, I feel, this is one of the great gifts from my teacher. He said, you get on the podium, you empty yourself out of ego, and you become a vessel, a container for everything else that is transpiring, the music itself, the other players, the listeners, and so forth. And I think he's totally right. The conductor's job is simply to shepherd these various facets of what a symphony is on all its levels into something that's comprehensible and meaningful.
My goodness. I remember being at a concert. It wasn't a classical concert, actually. I can't remember what it was. at the Lowry in Salford, and at the end, it was a really good performance, whatever it was, and the whole afterwards, the whole theatre just erupted, and it was proper applause. You know, you can tell the difference between a polite applause and real appreciative applause. Everyone was really appreciative. It was a play or a musical, that's right, because the whole cast came on, and they were delighted. They were beaming away because we were happy and they were happy, and we were happy that they were happy, and vice versa. And there was this sense of ideal community. It felt like I was suddenly in a pure land, to use a Buddhist term. And
Right.
I felt so moved, more moved by the applause than by the play or whatever it was that had just happened before. It was a marvelous experience.
It's very palpable, isn't it? When you know something's happened in a performance, or in any artistic medium in a way, that somehow raised up the level of consciousness in a way of the entire audience. And it is, as you said, you know when it's happened. Um, yeah, and I remember the same thing. I participated, this is as a violinist, in a performance of, it's a gigantic piece, an incredibly beautiful piece by Olivier Messiaen called The Quartet for the End of Time. And, you know, in a way it's profoundly, he's evoking really profound, you might say, spiritual emotions. And it ends very slow. We just, you know, so it's for violin, cello, clarinet, and piano. And the eighth movement, which is something like "Pray to the Eternity of Jesus." I can't remember the exact title, but and it's very, very slow, with these beautiful ethereal chords that Messiaen is justly famous for. And then it sort of tails off, as it were, into eternity. And there's, in one time I played it up in Canada. Yeah, we just were still, and the audience, they didn't move about a minute. It was fantastic. And you just felt, wow, something happened here. I don't know what exactly, but it was really beautiful. Yeah, so we know when something has moved the listener, and that's just, it's lovely. It makes it all worthwhile certainly
Yes.
as a performer, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, it must do. It must be a marvelous experience. Uh, we should probably come to a close soon, and in a way, it would be good to close with that. But there's just something I want to read to you, for something that you've written, actually.
Okay.
This comes from a piece you wrote called "A Testimony to Kamak." Do you know?
Well, I have a vague recollection of it, but okay, go on.
So Kamak is CAMMAC, and it doesn't tell you what that stands for.
Well,
What does that stand for?
it stands for Canadian Amateur Musicians, Musiciens Amateurs du Canada. So it's an acronym,
Ah, okay,
and it's a
okay.
sort of camp in
So
the summer. Yeah.
yeah, so you're writing this short piece about your experience of going there for 25 years and working with young musicians. And here's what you say here. So there is an ethos which defines what Kamak is. That through music, it really is possible to create a more ideal society in which generosity, love, open heartedness, positive communication, patience, energy, and even wisdom are all in the foreground. It's a lovely piece of writing, that. And that's to do with being with a bunch of musicians and just playing together, I suppose, and learning from each other.
Yeah. So Kamak actually is mostly adult amateur musicians.
Ah,
There are a few kids, but it's mostly amateurs. You know, they and some are extremely good, some are quite elementary in terms of how they play. They're divided usually into groups of, you know, similar levels, and we coach chamber music. And then, if they're so inclined, they can play in the orchestra, which meets in the evenings. And it's by a lake in Quebec. It's very lovely. But yes, the ethos, you know, because they all, you know, they're judges, school teachers, doctors, policemen. It doesn't matter. You know, they're all professions, but they've all love music. They come for a week to play music all day long. They're in seventh heaven, as they say, because they're doing what they love and doing all day long. So that's of course helpful. But somehow the making of music together, and what's lovely, it doesn't matter that there are a ton of wrong notes. Let's say we do, the first movement of a Schubert symphony, out of tune notes, people coming in the wrong. Doesn't matter at all, because people are offering what they can, as we said earlier, as I said earlier, to this bigger project in a way, and it's out of a desire for beauty, it's out of a desire for love. Um, and I think when we have those elements alive, yeah, wisdom somehow emerges out of that, can emerge. A higher level of communication, of more generous communication, more loving communication. So I'm really fortunate. I spend a lot of time with musicians, and so I'm a little bit. I'm aware of that. I'm a little bit removed from the sort of difficulties of sort of quote unquote pedestrian life. So I live. I realize live in a bit of a rarefied world actually.
You're almost like a monk.
Well, yeah, yeah, Mike living in the city, and in a way, I've got my Ara Loca string quartet, and we go and we have a chat, and with how he's doing, and but then we play, we're giving a concert actually on Sunday, and we're doing a Haydn quartet and a movement of Beethoven, and a movement of Shostakovich, and just to spend 2 hours playing this music, investigating it, trying to make it better, and so forth. It's not always rosy because like, oh well, that was out of tune. Okay, right. But nevertheless, you're again engaged with something that's really uplifting, and so I think that the call is for a person, for all of us. How can I? It doesn't have to be music; it can be anything. But how can I elicit from the depths a response to life that is embracing, that's finding a way to make it somehow more beautiful. I think that's it. Just the attempt to make our mundane life more than that, somehow more structured, more even keeled, more giving, more wise. I think, and that's and it doesn't, the arena in a way doesn't matter. But if we undertake that project, I think we all know, particularly as Buddhists, that it's a worthwhile adventure. We may not, it doesn't seem that we succeed. Like, I tell my meditation class, my local sangha, I'm constantly failing that. I did a course with Analia, he's a German monk. He lives in Massachusetts. A very wonderful teacher whose particular expertise is the Satipatthana Sutta. But I did a course, and then I'm determined to just bring a more consistent awareness to my daily life, and I just couldn't do it. I would stuff tennis balls in my pockets just so they'd be annoying enough to I'm trying to be mindful, but even then you get used to the discomfort of tennis balls stuffed in your pocket. But nevertheless, we have to be forgiving. Okay, well, but it's a project, as I said, that's really what makes life. Well, I was going to say more interesting, which is true, but I think just how more meaningful. And music can be, should be in a way, an aid to that project, a beautiful aid, a beautiful participant in that greater project. That's our human life. So I'm very blessed. I'm very fortunate that somehow or other I found myself on this sort of stream or river that's a sort of a musical life, and combined with the Buddhist life as well. So I mean that couldn't be more grateful that somehow that emerged, this sort of these two rivers converging into it's just a very fortunate life actually.
Yes, I must say it's hard not to envy you, your life. It sounds really wonderful. But I think we'll draw to an end there because I think that's a great way to end. But before we do so, I just want to let listeners know that a little while ago, I don't know how it happened, but I got an email inviting me to a virtual concert of the New Hampshire Philharmonic that you were conducting. And I went onto it and I clicked on, and now they let me know whenever you're going to do a virtual concert. And so I can always listen to, and if I don't listen to it at the time, I can always listen to it later. So I think after this, I'll ask one of our technicians, Diavajra, I think would be the person, to put up a link to that, and people can request to be put on the mailing list, so they too can listen to you conducting the New Hampshire Philharmonic. That would be really good, wouldn't it?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was just marvelous. Wonderful. I just so enjoyed it. I don't know how long we've been going on for.
A while, but
An hour?
Thank you, Ratnaguna. It's been a true pleasure to hang out with you, actually. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.